In the heart of the Wild West, secrets burn hotter than the desert sun. When she whispered, "Let me take it off first," the tough rancher froze. And what happened next changed everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The evening sky burned crimson above the wide Montana plains, the sun dissolving into streaks of orange and violet as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. Jack Callahan stood on his front porch, his thumb hooked through his belt loop, eyes fixed on the horizon where land met fire. His ranch spread before him, miles of fenced pasture, the cattle barely visible specks against the dying light. The air smelled of dust and leather, the familiar scent of solitude. He'd lived alone here for 7 years, with nothing but the wind, the stars, and the ghosts of his past for company. Life had become a steady rhythm of silence. Sunrise, work, sunset, whiskey, and sleep. Jack had once been a man of laughter and warmth, but the West had a way of burning softness out of a man's heart. He'd buried his brother in a prairie grave and lost his sweetheart to a sickness that even prayer couldn't touch. Since then, he'd made peace with loneliness. He told himself he didn't need anyone, that the open land and the endless horizon were all the companionship he'd ever ask for. But that night, the wind carried something different. A faint sound reached him, the steady beat of hooves slicing through the dust. Jack squinted into the distance, seeing a lone rider cutting across the plains. His instincts sharpened instantly. Strangers didn't ride alone after sunset, not in these parts. He rested his hand on the revolver at his hip as the rider approached. It was a woman. Her dress was torn, her bonnet missing, hair unbound and tangled in the wind. The horse stumbled as she pulled to a stop, chest heaving, and before Jack could say a word, she nearly collapsed from the saddle. Jack stepped forward, catching her by the arm before she hit the ground. Her skin was warm, feverish. "Please," she gasped, voice trembling. "I need a place to stay. Just for tonight." Her accent carried the faint trace of the East. Boston, maybe, too refined for the roughness of the frontier. Jack studied her face in the dim light. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she was young, no more than 24, and the look in her eyes was one he recognized too well. Fear. Not the kind born from storms or wild animals, but the kind that came from being hunted. He led her inside, the cabin dimly lit by a flickering oil lamp. "You can rest here," he said gruffly, setting down a tin cup of water. She drank like she hadn't seen water in days. Her hands shook, her nails chipped and broken. Jack couldn't help noticing the bruises peeking from beneath her sleeve. "You running from someone?" he asked quietly. Her eyes darted up, then away again. "Doesn't matter." "He won't find me here," she whispered. Jack didn't press. Out here, everyone was running from something. He simply nodded and tossed another log into the fire, letting the crackle fill the silence between them. For a while, the only sound was the storm outside, the thunder rolling over the hills, the wind pushing against the wooden walls like a living thing. She sat near the fire, staring into the flames, her lips trembling though she said nothing. "What's your name?" Jack asked finally. She hesitated before answering. "Clara. Clara Bennett." The name sounded fragile, almost borrowed. Jack leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "You from around here?" She shook her head. "No, I came from Kansas. Thought I could start over." "But starting over's not easy when someone owns your name." Her words lingered in the air, heavy and cryptic. Jack knew what she meant before she said another word. She was married, and not by choice. The bruise on her arm told its own story. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one toward her. She looked at it, uncertain, then took a sip, coughing softly. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" she asked, eyes flickering toward the gun at his side. Jack smiled faintly. "Fear's a part of life out here. It keeps you breathing. Forget it, and the land'll bury you before sunrise." She nodded, her eyes distant. As lightning flashed, Clara flinched, her hands clutching her chest. Jack leaned forward. "He hurt you bad, didn't he?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the chain around her neck, a small silver locket, and said softly, "Let me take it off first." Jack froze, not understanding. With trembling fingers, she opened the clasp and pulled the necklace free. The locket swung gently from her hand, the firelight glinting off its surface. She opened it and showed him the photograph inside, a man's face, cold and cruel. "My husband," she whispered. "He'll kill me if he finds me. I ran away last week." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen that kind of cruelty before, the kind that lived behind polished smiles and Bible words. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice steady. "Ain't nobody coming through that storm tonight?" Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't even know me!" Jack stared into the flames. "Don't need to. Sometimes the right thing don't need explaining." The storm raged harder outside, thunder rolling like cannon fire, but inside, a strange calm settled between them, fragile and uncertain. For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir inside his chest. When Clara finally spoke again, her voice was softer, steadier. "I thought I'd die out there," she said. "The river almost took me last night. If my horse hadn't seen your lantern, I don't think I'd be here now." Jack looked at her, realizing how close she had come to disappearing into the wild without anyone ever knowing her name. He poured her another drink, saying nothing. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, alive, like the quiet before sunrise. Outside, the wind howled like a beast, but in that cabin, two strangers shared the kind of stillness that changes everything. Clara sat quietly for a long time, her eyes tracing the shadows on the floor. "When the storm ends," she murmured, "I'll leave. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Jack didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire, thinking of how many times he'd said the same thing, to himself, to others, to ghosts. Finally, he said, "You can leave if you want. But out here, nobody survives alone for long." She met his eyes then, and for a moment, the fear in hers was replaced by something else. Trust, maybe. And as the fire burned low, Jack realized he didn't want her to leave at all. Morning came slow and gray, the storm finally breaking into a light drizzle that soaked the earth and filled the air with the scent of wet sage. Jack woke before dawn, as he always did, but this morning felt different. The silence was deeper, expectant. He turned toward the small cot by the fire. Clara was still asleep, her hair damp, one hand resting gently over her chest. For a moment she looked peaceful, like the trouble that chased her had vanished. Jack poured coffee into 2 tin mugs and stepped outside, staring across the misty plains, unsure what the day might bring. By the time the sun climbed above the hills, Clara was awake, standing at the window, wrapped in one of Jack's wool blankets. "I didn't mean to fall asleep so long," she said softly. "You needed it," Jack replied, setting a mug on the table. "Storm's gone. You can ride out if you still want to." She turned toward him, her face unreadable. "You want me to go?" He hesitated, then said, "I didn't say that." The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken words. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of hooves approaching, steady, deliberate, and too organized to be travelers. Jack's jaw tightened. He stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowing. A single rider came into view, the badge on his chest catching the sunlight. Sheriff Dalton. The man was broad-shouldered, his horse slick with mud from the night's rain. "Morning, Jack," the sheriff called.
"Got a minute?"
Jack nodded, motioning for him to dismount. "What's this about?" he asked, though a chill was already creeping through him. The sheriff tipped his hat. "There's a man riding through town, says his wife's gone missing. Claims she was taken by force." Jack felt Clara freeze inside the cabin. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seen anyone pass through?" Jack didn't move. He knew the rules of the West. Speak too much, you hang yourself. "Ain't seen a soul since last week," he said evenly, meeting the sheriff's gaze. Dalton studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Well, if you do, you best send word. The man's paying a good bounty." He mounted his horse again and turned toward the trail. "Take care, Jack. Folks are nervous." "Lot of runaways and rustlers lately?" Jack nodded, keeping his expression steady until the sound of hooves faded completely. Only then did he turn back toward the cabin. Clara stood in the doorway, pale as a ghost, trembling. "He knows," she whispered. They'll come back. Jack shook his head. He doesn't, not yet. But we gotta be careful. Clara sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I'm so tired of running, Jack. Every night I dream he's still behind me. Jack crouched down beside her, his rough hand resting gently on her shoulder. Then stop running, he said quietly. Ain't no man owns you now. She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. You don't understand. He's not just a man, he's a judge. He'll use the law to drag me back and no one will lift a finger. Jack's eyes hardened. Then I'll lift one, he said simply. She stared at him, realizing he meant it. He wasn't a man of fancy promises or empty words. He was a man who built fences, buried his dead, and stood his ground when others ran. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Clara reached for the locket she had thrown near the fire the night before. The chain was blackened, the photo inside half burned. Maybe it's time I finish what I started, she whispered. Jack watched her drop the locket into the embers. It hissed softly, melting away, her past consumed by flame. The day passed quietly, though neither found peace. Jack worked the fences while Clara tended to the horses, but both kept glancing toward the horizon. Just before sunset, the sound of distant gunfire echoed across the plain. 2 shots, then silence. Jack stiffened. Get inside, he ordered, but Clara grabbed his arm. You think it's him? He nodded once. If it ain't, it's someone who wants trouble. He loaded his rifle and stepped outside, scanning the distance. Dust rose along the ridge. 3 riders this time. Jack's stomach sank. He knew their look, bounty men. They didn't ride for justice. They rode for gold. As the riders approached, Jack stood firm in front of the cabin, his rifle leveled across his arm. Evening, boys, he called. What brings you this far out? The lead rider spat tobacco. A woman, he said. Judge Bennett's wife. Word is she's hiding on this ranch. Jack's eyes didn't waver. Ain't no woman here. The man smiled thinly. Then you won't mind if we take a look. He nudged his horse forward. Jack's voice hardened. You take one more step, you won't take another. The standoff stretched, the air heavy with the smell of rain and gunpowder. Finally, the men turned and rode off, but Jack knew they'd be back. That night, Clara stood by the fire again, her face bathed in orange light. You should have let them search, she said. They'll kill you if they find me. Jack took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. I've lived long enough, Clara. I ain't letting you go back to hell. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, Why are you doing this? Jack's eyes met hers. Because I reckon I've been dead inside for years. You reminded me what living feels like. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she took a step closer. Then what happens now? Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, simple, unadorned, worn by time. This belonged to my ma, he said. If you're looking to start over, maybe we both could. Her breath caught, disbelief flooding her face. After everything? He nodded. After everything. She hesitated only a moment before whispering, Then let me take it off first, and slid the last ring, the one her husband forced upon her, off her finger. She dropped it into the fire, watching it vanish beside the locket. Jack took her hand, his voice low and steady. Clara Bennett, will you stay? Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, soft and distant, as if the sky itself was blessing their vow. Clara nodded, her lips trembling. I'll stay. Jack smiled faintly, a rare, fragile thing. Then you ain't running no more. As the firelight flickered, she stepped closer, resting her head against his chest. For